Imagine your skin being peeled off, piece by piece, while you're still alive. Every nerve in your body screaming as each inch of flesh is torn away. The cold air biting into raw muscle, the blood dripping, the pain so intense you can barely hold on to reality. But you cannot pass out, not yet, because the executioner is careful to keep you conscious as long as possible. This isn't a horror story. This isn't some nightmare whispered in the dark. This was real. This was punishment, justice, and terror rolled into one. Across the vast Assyrian Empire, rebels and conquered enemies felt their skin ripped away under the burning sun. Their flayed bodies nailed to city walls as warnings to all who might dare to defy the king. In Persia, a corrupt judge could find his own flesh turned into a grisly covering for the seat of justice he once defiled. In medieval Europe, traitors were stripped of their skin in front of jeering crowds. Each cut meant to humiliate and destroy. And in China, flaying was used to punish those who had betrayed the emperor's will, ensuring that their agony would echo into the afterlife. To be skinned alive was to die a death worse than death. It was a method designed not just to kill, but to send a message, to break the spirit before the body finally gave in, to turn a human being into an example, a spectacle of fear. In this video, we will uncover the cold, brutal reality of flaying alive across history. We will see who suffered it, who ordered it, and why such a horrific practice was ever allowed to exist. This is not an easy story, but it is a true one. Because history is dark, and we must remember it. The origins of flaying alive trace back to the cradle of civilization, the dusty plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where empires were built on conquest. And the rule of kings was enforced by fear as much as by faith. Among the most ruthless practitioners were the Assyrians, masters of siege warfare and psychological terror. Kings like Ashurnasirpal II and Sennacherib carved their legacy in blood, ensuring their enemies would never forget what defiance cost. Flaying was not done in secret. It was a calculated spectacle. Captured rebels and enemy leaders were tied upright, their arms stretched or pinned, while skilled executioners made the first incisions along the limbs and torso, peeling back the skin as the crowd watched. It was slow, deliberate, and meant to send a message: resist, and this will be your fate. The Assyrians believed in the power of public fear, and flaying was the perfect instrument. The skins of the flayed were often nailed to the gates of conquered cities, or draped across walls as trophies. It wasn't enough to kill an enemy. Their suffering had to be seen, their bodies transformed into warnings that the king's power was absolute. And that rebellion would not just end in death, but in agony that would outlive the flesh. Reliefs carved in stone from these periods depict scenes of flaying alongside rows of impaled bodies and decapitated heads, a testament to a time when state terror was woven into the very fabric of governance. It was a dark logic: order through horror, submission through the spectacle of pain. This was how flaying alive took its place in human history. Not as a moment of madness, but as a systematic tool of power, born in the earliest cities, under the watchful gaze of empires that rose and fell on the backs of the conquered. Flaying alive was never a quick execution. It was a process crafted for agony, ensuring that each moment stretched into a lifetime of suffering before death would finally, mercifully arrive. The victim would first be stripped naked, exposed to the jeering crowd or the cold wind of dawn, depending on the whim of the rulers. Sometimes they were tied upright to a post, arms spread, or nailed by the wrists and ankles, the wood digging into their flesh before the blade ever did. The executioner would begin with small, precise incisions around the wrists, ankles, or the neck, careful not to cut too deeply. The goal was to separate the skin from the muscle without severing arteries, preserving life and consciousness for as long as possible. The peeling would begin, often with the limbs or the back, areas where the victim could feel each nerve-ending scream without the risk of immediate death. As the skin was tugged and sliced away, inch by inch, the pain would be indescribable, a raw burning agony that could make even the strongest minds break within minutes. Yet the body was forced to endure. The crowd, if present, would sometimes recoil, sometimes jeer, sometimes stand in stunned silence as the red, glistening flesh beneath the skin was exposed to the air. Flies gathering, blood dripping slowly to the ground. The victim's screams would echo off stone walls, reminding everyone of what defiance, treason, or betrayal would cost. Executioners were often skilled in prolonging the process, avoiding major veins and arteries, ensuring that blood loss would be slow, that the heart would continue to beat as the skin came off in ragged strips. Sometimes the executioner would pause, letting the pain and shock settle, before continuing with the next section of flesh. Infection would set in almost immediately, the open wounds drawing flies, dirt, and disease, adding another layer of suffering, if the victim survived the initial process. Some would last for hours, their bodies trembling uncontrollably, eyes wide with terror, voices reduced to hoarse sobs or animalistic cries, before shock or blood loss finally took them. Compared to other tortures of the ancient world, boiling, impalement, crucifixion, flaying alive was unique in its focus on the body itself, as the site of punishment, turning the skin, the very thing that defines human form, into a tool of terror. To be flayed alive was to be unmade while living, each strip of skin carrying away dignity, identity, and humanity, leaving only pain until death arrived to collect what was left. Flaying alive was not confined to the brutal campaigns of Assyrian kings. The Persian empires also wielded this punishment, embedding it within their system of justice as a tool of terror and cosmic retribution. Under the rule of Persian kings, flaying was often reserved for traitors, rebels, and corrupt officials, those who had not just broken laws, but had, in the eyes of the empire, violated the moral and cosmic order of society. It was a punishment meant to demonstrate that no one, not even the powerful, could escape justice. The most infamous account comes from Herodotus, who tells the story of Sesams, a corrupt judge under the reign of King Cambyses. Sesams accepted a bribe, twisting the law for personal gain, believing himself untouchable within his position of authority. But Cambyses was determined to show that corruption would be met with the harshest penalty. Sesams was arrested and sentenced to be flayed alive in public. Before a gathered crowd, his skin was stripped from his living body, the executioners careful to keep him conscious as long as possible so he could feel the agony of every inch removed. The screams of a man who once held power, now echoing as a warning. But the punishment did not end with his death. Cambyses ordered that Sesamner's flayed skin be tanned, and used to upholster the judge's chair. His son Otens was then appointed to replace him. Forced to dispense justice while seated on the skin of his own father, a constant, gruesome reminder of what corruption would cost. This act was more than cruelty. It was a symbol, embedding fear and the reminder of justice into the very fabric of governance. Each time Otens sat on that chair, the people who entered the courtroom would see it, and remember justice in Persia was not merely a word, but a threat. Flaying in Persia was not hidden in dark rooms or carried out in secrecy. It was a spectacle designed to remind everyone that while the Persian kings ruled with wealth and splendor, their power was enforced by the raw terror of what could happen to those who dared to betray the order they upheld. Though medieval Europe is often remembered for its gallows, racks and burnings, flaying alive was another shadowy tool occasionally pulled from the arsenal of state terror, reserved for traitors, assassins, and those whose crimes were considered unforgivable. It was rare, so brutal that even in an age of public executions, many rulers hesitated to use it. But when they did, it was meant to send a message. Betrayal will bring you worse than death. In France, records tell of flaying used on traitors who conspired against the crown, their skins displayed on city gates as a reminder that royal authority was not to be challenged. Germany's fragmented principalities saw similar punishments, often for coin counterfeiters or assassins. Their punishment designed to be a deterrent in a world where local rulers had to project fear to hold power. One of the most haunting references comes from Scotland in the 15th century. William de Soulis, accused of witchcraft and plotting against King Robert the Bruce, was rumoured in ballads and chronicles to have been boiled alive or flayed as part of his execution. His death turned into legend to warn other would-be conspirators. Flaying in medieval Europe was often combined with other punishments. Limbs might be broken before the skinning began, or the flaying might follow a publipping or branding. Crowds would gather, some eager for the spectacle, others sickened, but unable to turn away as the executioners began the slow, meticulous process of removing the skin, letting the victim's screams mingle with the jeers of the watching crowd. It was a message carved into living flesh, a reminder that the social order was enforced not just by the sword, but by fear. Monarchs and city rulers alike used these moments to assert dominance, to maintain order in turbulent times, and to remind every subject that treason, rebellion, or assassination would be met with a punishment so horrifying that even death would seem a mercy. Even in an age of darkness, flaying alive was considered an act of exceptional cruelty, reserved for those whose crimes were seen as tearing at the very fabric of society. And so, in the shadow of castles and city walls, under grey skies, a few met an end so gruesome that their stories became whispered warnings for generations to come. In China, skinning alive was not just a punishment. It was a theatrical warning from the emperor himself, ensuring that all who witnessed it understood the cost of disloyalty and corruption. During the Ming and early Qing dynasties, flaying was reserved for the most severe crimes, treason, corruption, or grave offences against the emperor's authority. To steal from the people, to betray the trust of the throne, was to risk losing not just your life, but your very skin. Corrupt officials who embezzled funds or abused their power sometimes found themselves dragged to the public square. There, before a gathered crowd of officials, soldiers, and trembling citizens, the sentence would be read aloud, the emperor's decree echoing like a death knell. The condemned was stripped naked and tied to a frame or pole, arms stretched above the head, the skin marked with blades before the cutting began. Unlike some methods designed for rapid death, the executioners were ordered to prolong the process. Each slice was deliberate, each peel of skin meant to be a lesson etched into the minds of those watching. The flayed skin was often displayed, hung upon the city walls or the gates of the Yemen's government office, where the official had once held power. In some accounts, the body was left for days, a rotting monument to imperial justice, ensuring that all who passed would remember that the emperor's reach extended not just into life, but into the flesh of those who dared to defy him. One recorded case under the Ming dynasty involved an official who had embezzled grain during a famine, causing thousands to starve while he grew wealthy. When discovered, he was sentenced to be skinned alive in the marketplace, his screams ringing out over the city as a reminder of the emperor's divine mandate to protect the people and to punish those who failed in their duties. Even under the Qing dynasty, when legal reforms began to modernize punishment, flaying remained a lurking threat, occasionally employed to maintain fear and demonstrate the emperor's absolute authority. In China, where Confucian ideals emphasized order and hierarchy, Flaying alive was a brutal paradox, a society valuing stability, yet willing to tear the flesh from its own subjects to enforce it. It was the state's way of making an example so vivid, so horrifying, that the memory of the punishment would live on in the minds of all who witnessed it, echoing down generations as a reminder of what betrayal could cost. Flaying alive was never just about physical agony. It was a calculated, deliberate psychological torture designed to break the spirit before it destroyed the body. In China, where the belief in body integrity after death was tied to one's passage into the afterlife, being flayed was not merely an earthly punishment. It was a curse that extended beyond death. To die without your skin meant your spirit would carry that disfigurement into eternity, unable to find peace. For the condemned, the terror was not just in the imminent pain, but in the belief that their punishment would follow them into the next life. In Europe and Persia, flaying alive was used to dehumanize the victim completely, reducing them to an example, an object lesson in fear. The execution site was carefully chosen, a bustling marketplace, the city gates, the steps of a courthouse, anywhere crowds could gather to witness the screams, to see the blood, to smell the coppery stench that filled the air as flesh was slowly torn away. The smell of blood, the metallic tang mixing with the scent of sweat and fear, became part of the punishment, an atmosphere of terror that soaked into the memories of those who witnessed it. Children clutched their parents, officials forced themselves to watch, and criminals in the crowd reconsidered every temptation toward disobedience. For the victim, there was no escape, no moment of dignity left to cling to. Every scream was a testament to the pain, but also to the complete loss of control and humanity. Their body, once a vessel of life and identity, became an instrument of their destruction. Executioners were sometimes chosen for their ability to prolong the suffering, keeping the victim conscious for as long as possible, ensuring that every nerve ending was alive to register. The agony of skin being separated from flesh, of cool air hitting exposed muscle, of blood trickling slowly until the body could take no more. The spectacle was as important as the execution itself. It was a message etched in screams, painted in blood, seared into the minds of all who witnessed it. This is what happens when you defy authority. This is what happens when you betray the crown, the emperor, or the law. This is fear, alive and screaming, so you never forget. Flaying alive was a punishment that stripped away the layers of a person's humanity before it took their life, making it not just a method of execution, but a psychological weapon wielded by empires to remind every subject that their body, their spirit, their very identity could be torn away if they stepped out of line. Flaying, like so many horrors of the past, eventually met its end under the slow grind of modern legal reforms and shifting human conscience. As Enlightenment ideals spread across Europe, emphasizing human rights, dignity, and the rule of law, brutal public punishments began to fall out of favor. Philosophers and reformers argued that cruelty did not strengthen societies, but revealed their weaknesses. Religious voices also rose, condemning the savagery of tearing flesh from the living in the name of justice. In Persia, as dynasties modernized and pressure from European powers increased, the practice quietly disappeared from official punishments, replaced by more civilized forms of execution. In China, the decline was gradual. As the Qing dynasty faced modernization pressures and internal reforms in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, flaying alive was formally outlawed, along with other ancient forms of execution. As new legal codes aimed to align with international expectations of justice, the last whispers of flaying faded, leaving behind stories etched in historical records and folklore, terrible reminders of how fear was once enforced with knives, screams, and the smell of fresh blood in the air. Flaying ended not because humans suddenly became kind, but because the world changed around it, and the darkness that once justified it was forced into the shadows. History is filled with darkness, and flaying alive is a reminder of how far humans have gone to maintain control and power. Behind every ruler's decree, behind every act meant to preserve order, there were real people whose lives ended in agony, stripped of dignity, layer by layer. And in the end, history is dark, and we must remember it